In 2021, Saudi Arabia announced something that defied logic. A city, 170 kilometers long, 500 meters tall, 200 meters wide, built in a straight line through one of the most hostile deserts on Earth. It would house 9 million people, have no cars, no roads, no carbon emissions. Everything you needed within a 5-minute walk. They called it the Line. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman stood in front of the world and called it civilizational revolution, a $500 billion reimagining of how humanity lives. The world watched. Investors circled. Construction crews moved in. And then in early 2026, quietly, with no press conference, no official announcement, Saudi Arabia stopped building it. But here's what nobody is asking. Where did the money go? Before we follow the money, let's be precise about what actually happened on the ground, because the numbers are staggering even in failure. Saudi Arabia excavated a trench 170 kilometers long through the Tabuk Desert. It is, right now, the largest empty excavation in human history. They drove 16,000 foundation piles, some 70 meters deep. They moved enough concrete for Phase 1 alone to build 350,000 average American homes. And then they stopped. The current plan, the scaled-back, quietly revised, quietly leaked plan, is to complete 2.4 kilometers of the line by 2034. Not 170, 2.4. And instead of 9 million residents, they're now targeting 300,000. The deadline, Saudi Arabia is hosting the FIFA World Cup in 2034. They need something to show the world. The mirrored city isn't dead. It's a prop. Here's the thing. Nobody who worked on the line will say publicly, but that engineers have been saying privately for years. The line was never buildable, not at the scale promised. The mirrored glass facade alone would have required 170 million square meters of glass. At peak global production rates, every glass manufacturer on Earth working at full capacity, that's a 200-year supply for the facade alone. The foundation piles required to support a 500-meter-tall structure across unstable desert geology would have taken decades just for Phase 1. The dewatering system needed to keep the foundations dry was pumping 90,000 cubic meters of water per hour, equivalent to draining an Olympic swimming pool every 2 minutes, indefinitely. And the water. In one of the driest regions on Earth, the line's 9 million residents would have needed desalinated water piped in continuously. The energy cost of that desalination alone would have rivaled the output of a small power grid. Senior architects and engineers began resigning from the Neom project as early as 2023. Not because the vision wasn't exciting, because the physics didn't work. So if the engineers knew, and they did, then who kept writing the checks? This is where core magnitude's investigation begins, because a project can fail and still make certain people very, very rich. The line was funded through Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, the sovereign wealth fund controlled directly by MBS. The PIF had over $700 billion in assets when construction began. Writing billion-dollar checks for Neom wasn't a financial strain. It was a strategic deployment. The construction contracts went to a network of Saudi-connected firms, many of them subsidiaries of companies tied directly to the Saudi royal family's business interests. The excavation contracts alone, just moving the sand, ran into tens of billions of dollars. A Reddit commenter with apparent insider knowledge put it bluntly, royally connected contractors console themselves by swimming in their money bins. The foreign engineering and architecture firms brought in for the design work, international names, prestigious firms collected hundreds of millions in fees before many of them quietly walked away when asked to certify designs they believed were undeliverable. The money moved. It just didn't move into a city. And the people who paid the real price weren't investors. In early 2026, something interesting appeared in the financial news. Saudi Arabia announced a new entity called Neom, a $100 billion AI infrastructure company backed by the PIF, positioned to compete directly with the UAE's AI ambitions and America's own data center build-out. Neom's strategy: build massive, seawater-cooled AI data centers, the kind of infrastructure that requires enormous amounts of water for cooling, the kind of infrastructure that benefits from being near the coast, the kind of infrastructure that could, say, repurpose the existing deep foundations already sitting on a cleared stretch of land near the Red Sea in the Tabuk Desert. You see where this is going. The completed sections of the line's foundation, the most structurally advanced portions, located within a few miles of the Red Sea, are now being evaluated for AI data center development. The seawater provides cooling. The existing infrastructure provides the base. The PIF provides the capital. Saudi Arabia didn't abandon the line's investment. They redirected it. The city was always a cover story, not for fraud, but for a longer game. The line was a globally visible, politically powerful announcement that said, Saudi Arabia is not a petrostate. We are the future. It attracted global attention, global talent pipelines, and global investment interest into the kingdom. Now that narrative has shifted. The future isn't linear cities. It's AI infrastructure, and Saudi Arabia wants to own it. There is a version of this story that ends with a shrug. A rich country tried something ambitious, scaled it back, pivoted to something profitable. Markets move on. But the Huwaitat tribe doesn't get to move on. The Huwaitat are a Bedouin tribe who had lived in the Tabuk region for generations. Their villages sat directly in the path of the line. In 2020, Saudi authorities began the forced displacement of the tribe to clear the land for construction. Abdul Rahim al-Huwaiti refused to leave. He live-streamed his defiance from his home. He was shot and killed by Saudi security forces in April 2020. In 2024, Saudi courts sentenced members of the tribe to death for protesting the displacement. Some sentences were later reduced following international pressure, but not before the story confirmed what many already suspected. The civilizational revolution was being built on forcibly cleared land, with violence as the enforcement mechanism. Thousands of migrant workers, many from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, were brought in for the construction phase. When the line scaled back, many were left without work, without savings, and without a clear way home. Online forums in 2026 are filled with workers asking when construction will restart, hoping the paychecks will return. This is the part that doesn't appear in the Neom promotional videos. Here's the current state of Neom as of April 2026. The line itself. Approximately 2.4 kilometers of structure is being completed for the 2034 FIFA World Cup. It will be operational as a showcase, not as a city. Neom's other components, the luxury island Sindala, the ski resort Trojena, the industrial port Oxagon, are at various stages of development, most significantly behind schedule. The Neom AI data center pivot is active and funded. $100 billion is being deployed. MBS has not publicly acknowledged the scale back of the line. Officially, Neom continues. The vision is recalibrated. The language is careful. But satellites don't lie. The 170-kilometer trench sits largely empty. The largest excavation in human history, a scar across the desert with no city rising from it. Saudi Arabia spent somewhere between $50 billion and $100 billion, the exact figure is classified, on a project that produced a hole in the ground and a pivot to AI. Here's what Neom actually was. It was never primarily a city. It was a signal, a $500 billion announcement to the world that Saudi Arabia was diversifying, that oil wasn't the only thing they had to offer. It attracted investment. It generated global press. It repositioned MBS as a visionary rather than just a crown prince sitting on oil reserves. Did it work? In some ways, yes. Saudi Arabia has attracted hundreds of billions in foreign investment since Vision 2030 launched. The country is hosting the World Cup, Formula One, and global tech conferences. The line was the marketing campaign for a geopolitical repositioning. The product being sold wasn't a city. It was Saudi Arabia itself. The money followed the power, and the power is now moving toward AI. That's the story mainstream megaproject channels aren't telling you. Not how it was built, but why. Not the concrete, but the calculation. That's core magnitude. Subscribe. We're just getting started.